The history of gaming has many, many fathers, but the history of multiplayer gaming, well, we can narrow that down pretty much, and our guest today is definitely one of them. From his very earliest, we're going to get into it, but his best known creation to literally pioneering the area of academic study of gaming as we know it today. Well, I'm very, very pleased to welcome Richard Bartle to the show.
I'm pleased to be here.
So, Richard, as we do with all of our guests here, I'm going to start with a very basic question. Give us a little bit of information about your educational background.
Okay. How far back do you want to go? Primary school?
Actually, that's very interesting. I mean, we've got a pretty widely spread international audience. So from the accent, I'm guessing you went through the English school system. So there may actually be some relevant points there. I mean, you just did you have any kind of specialization before entering university?
No. The English school system, it depends on which part of England you're in, but the part I was in was there was what was called an infant school, which took you up to the age of about 7, and then there was the junior school, which took you up. Infant school took you to age 11. The junior school took you from age 11 to either 16, or if you stayed on to do more exams, 18. I went through the primary school system to age 11. Junior schools, you start to do some specializations. So people might specialize in languages or sciences or drama or something like that. And you do it through examinations. Now, the system used to be way, way long ago that at 11 you took an exam called the 11 plus, and if you passed it, you went to a grammar school, and they were full of the smart kids. And if you failed it, you went to a secondary modern school, which were full of the smart kids who didn't actually do any work. So I was expected to go to a grammar school, but the year that I was due to go, the education system was changed, and they merged secondary and grammar schools together. So we had what was called a comprehensive school. So I was at school with children of all ranges of abilities. I preferred the sciences over the humanities because with sciences, you knew if you got something right or wrong, you could test it. Whereas with humanities, you were basically how much did the teacher like you, which wasn't a good situation to be in, especially if the teacher thought you were a smart aleck or something. So I've focused on the sciences and mathematics, and it was. I also did computer science, which back in the mid-70s was pretty unusual, but we had access to a computer run by British Petroleum, BP. About 15 miles away, they had a large chemical plant, and in order to ingratiate themselves with the local population for spewing chemicals into the air, they gave access to the schools who wanted computer science to have it. And it turned out that our maths teacher had unusually done a PhD in chemistry, but had some experience with computers. So he said, yeah, okay, we'll take it on. We got another guy who came in occasionally to teach, because he used to teach, use computers at an early warning system out on the Yorkshire moors. So I did get to access computers despite living in the back of beyond. I mean, it's really 14 miles east of nowhere. And from that, I learned, well, it was basic, but I thought, well, that's I'm pretty good at this, and I quite like this. So when it came to applying for universities, you could apply for, I think, 5 universities, and you had, at the end of it, you had to have one main and one what they called insurance, which was if you didn't get the main exam university. Unfortunately for us, because the teachers were used to teaching children who were from the secondary modern, the non-grammar school era, because our school used to be a secondary modern and then converted to comprehensive. We were the first year where they had children who were willing to learn, or willing to learn but not so nervous that they failed their exam. We weren't really told how to take exams, and because of this, the pass rate wasn't great. We were being told things like, you've got to put your working out, you've got to write down your working out. Well, for us, the working out was just putting scribbles, little multiplications. Whereas what they meant, it transpired, we later found out, was you're supposed to give a step by step by step by step method. So the mathematics exam I did was the best exam that I ever did. I got every question right. I am sure of it. But if you get if there are 6 marks for a question and you get 1 mark for the correct answer and 5 marks for the steps to get to the correct answer, well, you've only got 1 mark. And we, in our naivety, thought that if you just wrote the answer down, that showed you were much cleverer than the people because you'd done it in your head. But that wasn't the case. And as a result of that, despite the fact it was the best exam I ever sat, I only got a C in mathematics. They used to mark on a bell curve rather than if you get more than 60%, you get. It used to be a bell curve, so that top 5% got an A, and the next 10 got a B, and so on. So I didn't go to my university of first choice, which was Exeter University. I went to Essex University instead. I had applied for Cambridge, but they had their own entrance exams, which I wouldn't have passed. Well, I would have passed them 6 months later, but I didn't pass them. I passed one. It was basically the general studies, and they said, we really, really, really like this guy, but he's not going to come here to study maths because he can't do double differentiation. Well, yeah, 6 months later I could because I'd been taught it, but well, they want people who study things off their own for their own interest. So, well, anyway, I wound up at Essex University. Now, back then, I'd applied to do maths. Back then, the first year of the 3-year course was. I'm sorry, I'm boring you here, and you're
no, not at all, not at all. No. Sorry, as somebody in an educational system who grew up in a completely different educational system, but now teaches at a university here in Germany, finding out these differences is fascinating, and I think it will also give us some interesting setup for later on. Well, so please go for it.
It's different to what it is in the UK now, but back then, the Essex University was a common first year, so you did 3 subjects, and you didn't have to choose which one to do until the second of your 3 years. And so in the first year, I did maths because that's what I wanted to do, and physics because I knew physics, and computer science because I had done some computer science. And there were about 300 people doing maths and computer science. Not so many doing physics, maybe 200. And when it came to the exams, 2 people got higher marks than me in mathematics. One of them, Stephen Murrell, was a bona fide genius. The examinations that we did at age 18, they were called A-levels, still are. You remember I said the top 5% got an A. Well, he did 12 of these exams in the same month, and in different subjects, and got 11 A's and 1 B in chemistry, which he therefore hated. So he was in the Guinness Book of Records for having the most A levels in one sitting. So he genuinely was better at me than maths. But in computer science, I was top. There was nobody better than me. So I thought, well, that's my calling. So I switched to computer science. They did try to persuade me to do maths. There was a lecturer who was into group theory, and I'd been the only student who'd ever got his 30 questions right on group theory. So he wanted me to do that, but I said, no, I got to do computer science here because that's clearly what I'm better at. So I did computer science. Now, the way that degrees were given out back then, the classifications were first class degree, upper second, a 2-1, a lower second, a 2-2, also known as a Desmond after the Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Then there was a third class degree, and then there was a pass, and then there was a fail. And in general, most students got a 2-2. That was the average mark. Each year, very few students would get a first. Some years, nobody got a first. My year, one person got a first, and that was me. Now, today, something like 40% of our students get a 2-1 or above, and there'll be at least 15-20% of them will get a first. So clearly our teaching has improved since then.
Yeah, that's definitely
nothing to do with grade inflation or anything. So anyway, because I got a first, I could stay on and do a PhD with the one PhD grant, and I chose to do it in artificial intelligence. And the reason I chose it was because as an undergraduate, I'd written along with Roy Trubshaw, this game called Mud, Multi-User Dungeon, which Roy had started. And I came in early on. And I wanted to have non-player characters who were smart. And to give them the smarts, that was artificial intelligence, which I studied. Now, I was
just out of curiosity, which year are we talking about? Are we in when you start your PhD work?
1981.
1981. Okay.
Yeah, in Britain, there'd been universities setting up artificial intelligence, and the government was wondering. They seemed to be asking for money and things. Should we do it? And they commissioned a physicist, Professor James Lighthill, I think his name was, something Lighthill anyway, to see if artificial intelligence was worth funding. And he went off to all the labs in America and all the places in the UK and had conducted his study, and eventually came to the conclusion that no, it's not worth funding, it's going nowhere. So most of the universities that studied AI therefore stopped because they weren't going to get any research grants, but 3 didn't. Edinburgh, which was and still is the leading AI university in the UK, Sussex University, which came at it from a cognitive science kind of direction, and Essex University. We were the 3 that said, well, we're going to study it anyway, because our founding professor, Tony Brooker, who's unfortunately dead now, he was a friend of Turing's. He believed that the destiny of computer science was ultimately to make what he called a cyborg, essentially that people were going to make intelligent entities, and therefore it was important to study this. So he rebelled and took the department with him, and so we didn't abandon it. There were some odd isolated people in other universities who kept doing it. I mean, there was Karen Spark-Jones at Cambridge, for example. She kept with AI. Other people did AI but called it something else, like said it was psychology, but it was AI. Anyway, so I did my PhD in AI, which took only 6 years, because after 3 I became a lecturer, and then that kind of put a dent into my time for completing the PhD. I didn't do a master's, I went straight from undergraduate to PhD. So I got the PhD, and that finished my formal education. Right, you can wake up now.
No, 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 quite the contrary. This is fascinating. So, okay. So ultimately, you go for a PhD in artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And we're at, what, 1986, 87 then?
Yeah, 87, I think, was when
87.
I got PhD.
Okay. Yeah. Now, obviously, you dropped a little hint at something very important in between. So in undergraduate, you started working on a project somebody else had started, a little thing called MUD.
Yes.
So let's go back a few steps. You have access to the computer already in school.
Mm-hmm.
Before you get to university. And I have to ask the big general question, other than programming basic on this thing, were you engaged with games at all on that on that initial system from BP?
Well, yeah. I mean, what else are computers good for? Yes. We learned basic, but we had to write things in basic. So yeah, I mean, I wrote games. I wrote, I think I wrote a tank battle game. I wrote a, well, it wasn't much a game. It was a talking system where you talk to it and it talked back. You know, like today's ChatGPT or DeepSeek, whatever you're going to be using, Claude. I wrote something that you could talk to and it would talk back, but only. I mean, it was very simple, obviously, because it was in basic and it didn't do much more than pattern recognition and know what you'd asked before. But I wrote something like that. Yeah, I mean, of course. I wrote something to play noughts and crosses. Not that was difficult, but, you know, it's mainly a data structures thing. But so, yeah, of course, I'd done that. But games were, for me, and they still are, they're not a computer thing. Games are games. We used to play board games all the time as a child. My dad was a gamer, and every weekend we'd play 1, 2, 3, what we called big games. You get the big board out and you'd set it all up and you'd play it. And yeah, we started with things like Monopoly and Cluedo and some of them were Totopoly, which is a horse racing game, and one that was escaping from a prisoner of war camp, and there was war games, a Risk. We played Risk like 98 times or something, and I won once. My dad and my brother every single time, other than the last time we played. And I think they must have let me win. Anyway, we played these games many times. Every time we played Monopoly, my dad wrote on the back of one of the 100 notes who had won. Eventually, he ran out of 100 notes. And he wrote on the back of 500 notes, and it was the end of the 500s. Or maybe he started with the 500s and 100. But basically, you know, he'd written like 3 times on each one of these who'd won on what particular date. So that was we played a lot of games, and because we played a lot of games, through osmosis, I picked up an understanding of games and game design, and I invented games myself. Well, so did my brother. We played them with each other. Sometimes with my dad, but one of the things that we did was we created games that were, you'd call them paracosms, games that was a paracosm is like a fictional universe. So Lord of the Rings is a paracosm, and Austin Teppan writes Islandia is a paracosm, and Tecumel by M.A.R. Barker Phil Barker is a paracosm, and so most kids create paracosms, you know, their own imaginary worlds, but it doesn't go anywhere, and they grow out of it. But some people, they don't grow out of it, and they keep them with them, and so I made several paracosms. I mean, at least I can think of at least half a dozen of them. And some of them I linked together, made, you know, like the Bartle cinematic universe, but others were just independent. And so I thought, when I get to university and I've got access to a big computer, I'm going to make a game world. And I got to the university, and I joined the Computer Society about 2 or 3 weeks late because I didn't find it at the Society's bazaar. And when I joined it, I learned that this other student who was a year older than me, Roy Trubshaw, had started like that week to make his own game, which was to be an online world. And I thought, well, what's the point of me making a game world if Roy's going to make one? So we may as well join forces. So he led it, obviously, because he was more experienced and it was his idea to do that one. But I would have done it anyway. Might not have been it wouldn't have been the same as Mud. My idea was for a much larger scale virtual world, which would definitely have not been possible because we didn't have the memory back then in those days for computers. So Roy started. I mean, he wrote a program pretty well straight away just to demonstrate that the game would work. That was before I met him. It took him a couple of hours, and when I met him, he'd just almost finished the basics. You can play it version of what he called Mud, multi-user dungeon. That was in 1978. I started university in October, so we reckon it was about 19th of October. It could have been a few days before then that Mud was written. And Roy worked on that for about a year. That was in assembly language. He was creating the game, the physics of the game world and the communication and everything. I started doing some content design. Not that it was called content design back then, but that's what I was doing. It was building like rooms and monsters and things and putting them in. Then, because it was written in assembly language, it got kind of unwieldy. And Roy's a very fast programmer, but in general, people code about 60 lines a day. Roy's more like 100 lines of debug code a day, but 100 lines of assembly language isn't as much as 100 lines of a higher level language. So eventually he snapped and rewrote the whole lot as version 3. This would be playable by about Easter 1980. Whereupon he thought maybe he should work on his final year project. So he handed the reins of Mud over to me. So I had like code ownership from then onwards. And then he wrote his final year project, which was to write a compiler. We all had to do that back then. So
now, can I interrupt just one second here to give a little bit of context? So extensive experience at home playing board games. You created games on this timeshare system from BP using BASIC. Now, when you get to this project that's just been started, Mud, dungeon. So obviously there's a connection there with previous iterations of this game, Dungeon, which in itself, and please correct me if I'm getting the history wrong, is sort of a computer interpretation of the general role-playing concepts introduced originally by Dungeons and Dragons. Had you had any? Oh, okay, and this is where because that's the popular conception that there's interpretations of D&D showing up with adventure and so forth, and Mud just turns that all into multi-user. But I'm guessing that it's more complicated.
It is more complicated than that. Roy hadn't ever played Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, he'd heard of it, but he'd never played it. I'd played it quite a bit. I'd played it for a couple of years because we got one of the really early sets of Dungeons and Dragons. It cost us £6, which was a lot of money for us. We all had to club together. I've actually got it here. Let me just.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh my Lord!
I probably have to wash my hands.
Now that is a thing of beauty. That is a thing of beauty right there.
Yeah. So I played Dungeons and Dragons, but the D in Mud isn't for Dungeons and Dragons. when Roy was writing, he did want a game where people would have magic and fun. That was sort of his superficial, this is what I first want, not necessarily why he wants it, but this is what he wanted. He did want that kind of a game. And there were some, there was two games that he had access to, which were of the kind that you say about well, they weren't related to Dungeons and Dragons, but you could relate them to if you wanted. One of them was called Adventure or Colossal Cave, which was the first adventure game, hence the name. The other was Zork, because we could play that over what would later be called the internet. We had to hop from Essex University. I think we went through British Telecom's Martlesham Research Lab, maybe, or we certainly went through University College London, and I think from there it might have bounced to somewhere in Norway where there was an American base that you could go from there across over to somewhere like MIT. And Stanford and Rutgers and the other places that were big, Boat, Berenik and Newman. So we could actually get over there and play Zork, and Roy had done that. Not to play Zork, he'd just gone over there to explore and come across Zork. But the version that he played was called Dungeon. It was a Fortran port of Zork, which was written in its own definition language, MDL. So Roy was aware that there was this game called Dungeon, but he didn't know it was called Zork. He thought it was called Dungeon. And when he was writing Mud, he needed a name for it. It was going to be multi-user something, MU something. And he thought, well, if I want to attract people to play this game, I'm going to have to give them some idea of what it's like. And it was like Adventure, or Advent as we called it, because we only had 6 character file names. So it was like Advent, or it was like Dungeon. And he thought, well, Dungeon's clearly much better than Advent, so these things are going to be called dungeons. So he said it was like a multi-user dungeon. But it wasn't. The name Adventure took off instead of Dungeon, so really it was multi-user Adventure. That would have been a better name, and we did try to use it, but of course players, whatever players call things, that's what they're called. And there wasn't a dungeon in Mud, and it didn't have it wasn't drawn from Dungeons and Dragons. As I said, Roy had never played it. He used some of the things that he'd seen in the code for Advent that he managed to get hold of. That he did use some of that in the design of Mud, in particular the travel table, which was how nodes connect to each other. He thought, well, that looks a sensible way to do it, so he did it that way. But he was going to have to connect nodes together some way anyway. It's just that he, when he rewrote it for the for the version 3, which came to be known as Mud 1, it was he used the Advent idea as a basis. Likewise, when I put levels into Mud 1, that I got the idea of levels from Dungeons and Dragons, but that wasn't. I mean, I considered many options, well, at least 6 or so ways of implementing progression, and I thought levels. I'd use levels because it matched what I wanted to do, what I wanted to say through the game design. So you can say that there are influences from Dungeons and Dragons, but much more of an influence would be something like Lord of the Rings, the book, because that showed that it was possible to build a world that was independent of reality, but nevertheless self-consistent, and with the believability of reality. And because of that, that was enough. If you can do that in text, you can do that in a computer, and that was probably more of an influence.
Fascinating. So now, okay, a couple of technical questions, and this may be relevant then to the technology of MUD. So when he accessed through that jumping around the files for that Fortran version of Zork, was it then him basically just sending individual commands to that computer at MIT to play the game, or is he downloading a copy of the code to run locally on his system?
The first time he played it was that way, but then a copy of it made it to the DEC user group, DECUS, and there was a distribution tape that was sent around, and that was the one called Dungeon that he played. But they took that away. We weren't allowed to play that for very long. It was only occasionally when they'd not protected the disc properly that we could play that. Advent we could play more often, and that's the one that Roy got the code for. He didn't have the code for Zork, for Dungeon, which of course was DUNGEN for us because we only had the 6 characters in the file names. So he never saw the code for that, except there were articles. I think there was an article in Byte. He might have seen some code there. How to fit a large computer onto a large game onto a small computer. I think there was an article somewhere. So he was aware of it, but he hadn't seen it. But he had got the code for the Fortran port of Advent, which he managed to get the operators of our computer to give to him.
Okay, and the idea, obviously there's a level of complexity when you're trying to make it interactive for multiple users. Mm-hmm. Where do you know where that impulse came from to add that extra complexity as opposed to just creating a new single player experience?
Well, he wanted to make a world, same as me. We wanted to make a world, and it's not a world if there's only one person in it. We wanted an alternative to reality, somewhere where people could go that wasn't the real world, and not just one person. I mean, reality would be pretty boring if there was just one of you there. You wanted an actual world, a world where you can go and be and become yourself and ignore all the pressures from the outside world that were forcing you to behave in particular ways. So yes, we wanted to build a new world because the real world sucked, and that's why it had to be multi-user. It wasn't I'll just make I like this game Advent, I know I'll make a multi-user version of it. No, it wasn't that at all. It was the way people are treated in this world. We are not powerful enough to make any changes to that at all. Let's just bypass the whole damn thing and make our own world where we can be freed of the constraints that the real world imposes on us. And that was why I wanted to do it as well. I mean, we never really discussed it in any great depth, but that's pretty well, our objectives were aligned. I'd probably thought about why I wanted to do it more than Roy had, but Roy certainly had to have thought that way, or he wouldn't have done what he did. He started out by looking for ways to communicate between players. There was a system. I'm going to get into some really old DEC System 10.
Bring it on! Bring it on!
There was an inter-process communication facility where you could send a block of, I think, 512 words, where a word was 36 bits for a DEC 10. You could send that from one process to another, but there was a limited number of them for the whole system, about 512, and the operators wouldn't, the system programmers wouldn't give him access to it, because if he accidentally made a mistake and used them all up, then the rest of the system, the operating system that needed these as well, couldn't use them. So they said, no, you can't have them. So he was looking for an alternative, and he discovered one. So the DEC System 10 was a time-sharing machine, and it had it split its memory into two what were called segments, the high segment and the low segment. So the high segment was where all the code lived. He couldn't write to it, so he couldn't overwrite the code, but it was shareable. So if there were 10 people using the same editor, there was only one copy of the editor. The low segment, you could edit, but that wasn't shareable. So if I was editing a file, then it would be in my low segment, but you'd have a different low segment, a different low segment. So one high segment for each program and different low segments, one for each user. What Roy found was it was an unimplemented user operation call, as they call it, called setuwp, set user write protect. That enabled you to make the high segment shareable and writable. So normally it was just shareable and not writable. But so if you've got a section, you've got code and you reserve some space in it for data, the data you put in there is shared, is accessible by anybody who's playing the game. So that's where he stored the world model. So it was stored in shared memory in the high segment. Then he wrote a programming language called Muddle, not MDL, which was actually pronounced Muddle, but he was aware that it was of the serendipity that they were similar, but it was multi-user dungeon definition language, Muddle. So he wrote a language, he wrote something that compiled that into assembly language, which you then assembled and then could loaded that into memory, and then the memory was available to everybody when they run the game. So when people were playing Mud, there was one instance of the program Mud which had the world model in it, and when you did something, it used a system of memory locks to make sure that when you were updating a room, no one else was updating the room. So if you went into a room, it would say, okay, lock this bit of memory, move in, move me into here, take me out of where I was, and then unlock it. And that's how it all worked. If the game got so full, because it could only handle 36 players, Roy allocated 1 bit per player. So it only had it, if more than 36 came along, then it would crank up another instance of itself.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So sorry, I'm trying to actually figure out the mechanics of this. So when one player would enter a room, and it would lock it so that only that player can make changes to that room.
Yeah, only
for
temporarily.
Example, picking up item.
Yeah, no. Per command. So if I go into a room, and there's I don't know, a stick on the floor, and I say get stick, then what it says is, okay, wants to get the stick, so I shall lock the stick, move it from the room, put it into my inventory, and then open it up again. But if somebody else had simultaneously put lock stick, then there'd be a race, and whoever got there first would get it, and then I would see the message, so and so has picked up the stick, and then I wouldn't be able to pick it up. So it wasn't
okay.
Yeah, it wasn't as granular as that. It was
okay. Okay, interesting. Okay, yeah, so yeah, it makes perfect sense from a code standpoint. You're still basically doing one command at a time. It's just, I understand the locking mechanism. Sorry, my extremely basic knowledge of programming
well, it's
from
history
college
now,
is coming back.
It's all history, yeah. And it was under time sharing, so the way it worked was users would get a time slice, and so the CPU would the PCs are more powerful. The CPU would give them a few milliseconds of control, and then it would pass over control to somebody else. And in those few milliseconds, that was when you would be doing these signal weights and everything for the picking things up. And then your process would, what they call hibernate, just wait until it's interrupted if you want to get something and it's currently locked, and then it would wake you up. And yeah, we worked pretty well, given that it was on a machine that had, we had access to 70k of 36-bit words. That was at the weekends. During the day, you only had 35k, but so we couldn't really run mud during them. But 70k of 36-bit words. And I show my students a photograph I had of Roy, which I took when he was working on mud, and there's more bits in the photograph than there were in mud.
Oh, insane. So now, moving away from the technical side of it and back to your role, the content creation, obviously a world exists and goes beyond, let's say, the plot of a movie or the plot of a book. So, but most books, since you were taking inspiration from Lord of the Rings, it's built around a plot, a beginning, a middle, and an end, if you will. How did you conceive of the concept in Mud of, is there an end game? Is there a final purpose to it? If you're going to interact with NPCs or other characters, what does the motivation for interacting with the world beyond just, it's cool because I can interact with it? What was the thought process in developing something there?
Well, we didn't have a plot. We wanted to make a world, and the real world doesn't have a plot, unless you're, I'm sure certain religions have very strong plots laid out for it, but the real world doesn't have a plot, and we didn't want a plot for Mud. We wanted the world to be sufficiently rich such that the interactions between the players and the world, and the world and the world, and the players and each other would emerge your goals. The end game, there was an end, but it wasn't a game. You had to get a certain number of points, and then you made it to the top level, which was called wizard or witch. We call them whizzies as a word meaning, both of them. And so we had the aim was to get to be a whiz, but after you'd done that, then you'd won. You could either stop playing or you could keep on essentially in administrative capacity. So you'd be playing and interacting with the other players, or you could start a new character and so on. So that was the aim, but it had permanent death in it. So if your character got killed there in a fight, and not if it did something stupid like jump off a cliff, then the character was dead, and you had to create another character or the same character and start again. And this allowed players to reconfigure their sense of identity as they were playing, so that the next time they could come back, they could wear a different personality or try to be something different. And I mean, it's by today's MMOs, people think, well, God, I die every 3 times a night in some games. But no, in Mud, because everybody had permanent death, if you were a sufficiently high level that you were worth attacking, somebody who attacked you also had to be of a high level, and they were then risking, if I lose, I have lost 3 months of play because they haven't died for 3 months. So it was it balanced like that. It doesn't scale up. If you try that kind of thing on one of today's MMOs, then it's not I am attacked by someone else my level. It's I am attacked by 30 people who aren't my level, or they might be your level but higher. It doesn't scale up if you've got that kind of activity. Although there are ways around that. I mean, there are design ways around it. But anyway, there wasn't a plot. There was just the story that you followed was one that emerged from your interactions with the game world, and it's the same as the real world. I mean, you're not following a plot. You might have goals, you might have ideas, you might want to do something by a certain time in order to achieve something, but it's not plotted out for you. There isn't fate saying, okay, and now you've once you've completed this Skype call, then you're going to win the lottery. There's nothing there. So we wanted a similar thing. That's how worlds work. If it's a proper world. So these days they would be called a sandbox world, where the world is rich enough. There aren't many virtual worlds that are like that. I mean, EVE Online is, because it is a very rich world. And I mean, Ultima Online to some extent as well. But most of the virtuals post World of Warcraft have followed the theme park method of, here are lots of little pieces of story because we're better at thinking of stories than you are, and you can select from all these different small stories the ones that are most meaningful to you. Yeah, because not everybody's got the greatest imagination or the time to reflect on why they're doing things.
Or the games don't have the interface that would allow them to do it.
I mean, Mud had a command line interface because back then everything had a command line interface. It wasn't that it was copied from Advent or anything, because, you know, the operating system was a command line interface, and it was just the same thing. You know, throw file at printer is the same thing as well, he wouldn't do that, but it would just be print something. But it was the same thing. You know, everything was that. So that was a special interface.
Understood. And unfortunately, I've never played Mud, so my one of my questions would be.
Same.
Well, I mean, just for the experience, it would have been interesting. But so how did you deal, and I'm really interested in, as you're developing it, obviously you probably encountered a bunch of problems that just came up that you didn't expect, design issues. Yeah. So one of the obvious ones is, okay, while you're playing the game, let's say you picked up that stick, you've got the stick in an inventory. Mm-hmm. The system's got to keep track of every item that's in the game and who has it at any given time or which room it's in. Yeah. I'm guessing that's a basically a text file that's keeping track of that. Oh
no. Okay. It was all held in memory in the high segment. Okay. So we did put things like the descriptions. Some of the text was on hard drive because we couldn't store all the text in the limited amount of memory. So you'd be print message 211, but the locations of objects that was in your inventory. The object did have a back pointer, so that if you wanted to know, where is the longsword, if you give the where longsword command, it would look at the longsword record and then say, well, that's in this player record or in this room record. If it's in the player record, it could then tell you where the player was. It's in the it would probably just tell you who was holding it. It wouldn't tell you where they were, because for gameplay reasons, you wouldn't want people to know that. But so it was all held in memory. We didn't store it in a static database. And also the other thing is that what persisted across a reboot was just the game world and your character. So if you picked up if you picked up the longsword, you would have that until the game reset, and then you wouldn't have it. It wasn't something that you kept offline, and once you got it, you could log off and never log in again, and no one else would ever have the longsword. It was something. It was only there until the game shut down. When no one was playing it, it would shut down. Not always. Let's put it this way: if it could only shut down if no one was playing it or if it crashed.
Okay.
But if no one was playing it, that didn't mean it necessarily shut down. Things could still be where they were. So the persistence, what persisted, wasn't as much as in today's worlds, but then what persists in today's worlds isn't as much as what persisted in some of the later MUDs. So it's just depends on what you want to persist.
Understood. And so you guys are developing this, you're building this content. Now, was play play ultimately does get spread out that people can log in from other computers to access this. Mm-hmm. How long is the system just limited to your university? And how many people does it attract during that early phase?
Okay, well, the ones who are from the university we called internals, and the ones who are from outside the university we called externals. And in the same way that we could go over to MIT over a packet switching service, the people from MIT could come over to Mud. We logged in. We had to give a little strapline for who we were. So our strapline was, "You haven't lived until you died in Mud." And people saw it and thought, "What's that?" So they hopped over and they played it. So yeah, I mean, there was people playing Mud from the USA in 1979.
Wow.
In fact, the guy who used to be head of the MIT Media Lab, Joey Icho, he played Mud that way. I think he came from Tokyo. I think he bounced in from Tokyo. So it was always possible, but from other university computers, it was possible. For general people in the real world, we did have external modems. There were only 300 baud, but you could log in externally if you knew how to, and we told people how to through the computer press. So they came in, but it only had about half a dozen lines, so they all put some money together and bought the university some more modems so that more of them could log in. And they would log in from like midnight till 6 o'clock. In fact, they'd log in before midnight so that they'd get a slot. Because if there was many more people trying to get in than there were slots, then you'd probably want to get in quite early. So they would play generally at night. Back then, the UK's telephone system was very expensive. You had to, it was something like £2 an hour or something to play. People wouldn't pay that now, let alone back when the average earnings were 8,000 a year. So it was quite expensive to play it, but so we got a lot of fairly wealthy kids playing, which is why they or their parents at least could afford to chip in for the extra modems. There was also a system called a midnight line, where you could pay £120 for a year, but you had free phone calls the entire time, the whole year, but only between midnight, hence the name, and 6 a.m., which was ideal for playing Mud. So we had a few players with midnight lines who would just play every night and then sleep during the day. Goodness knows what they did. Well, actually, I do know what some of them did. One of them defrauded the Department of Transport of £60,000 and got sent to prison for it. But anyway.
Oh! Wait. Okay. You do have to expand on this just a little bit. This sounds like a fun anecdote.
Well, not really. I mean, we had a player called Sue the Witch. And she was one of these dominant players, as in she was always there because she had a midnight line. And she would write letters to the other players, and some of them were like 100 pages long. They're really long letters, handwritten letters. She'd include photos, but she changed her appearance quite a lot. You know, it's hard to tell it was the same person. And some of the players actually got really, really fond of Sue. But now we were thinking, okay, Sue's, whenever you phoned Sue, she said, she'd answer the phone and said, "No, let me talk to you in the game," and then go off and you talk to her in the game. And then one day she said, "I'm going off to be an au pair in Sweden or Norway or somewhere, and that's it, goodbye." And people thought, that's really out of character. So they drove round to see Sue, and they show up at her address that had been sending emails to, postal letters to, and this woman opens the door and she says, "I think you better come in." And it turns out that Sue is actually a guy called Steve, who has been arrested for defrauding the Department of Transport for £60,000 and is now going to prison. I didn't actually get to speak to Steve. He called me after he came out of prison, and kind of to apologise, but you know, it was Steve was Sue the Witch was a character. The thing was, though, that it had occurred to me that Sue might not have been a bona fide female, and I'd done some tests, you know, like typing things where if someone's got nails that long that she claims she has, she couldn't type this quickly, and yeah, fair enough, she didn't type it that quickly. And also she bought a sweatshirt we had made with the description of Mud's opening room in it, and it said, "Narrow road between lands. You are stood on a narrow road between the land and whence you came. To the north and south are a pair of majestic mountains." And she said, "But this was great, but when I put it on, it said pair of majestic mountains right across my pair of majestic mountains." So we thought, okay, probably is female, but we were wrong. It was just someone who was masquerading and got into it way too deep, and then had to go off and be an au pair when real life caught up.
So basically, nothing has changed on the internet in 40 plus years.
No, catfishing.
Okay, sorry, fascinating aside. So, but there's a real community building up then here among these players.
Oh, yeah.
And is this all happening through interactions in the game, or do you have some kind of chat or email system separate from the game?
No, it's all in the game. There was email wasn't really a big thing back then. We had each university would have its own email system. We had one on ours. We could send messages to each other as students, but we couldn't really send them off campus. Didn't happen until a bit later, or we could send them to other places, and we were probably charged for it, so we wouldn't be doing that. No, they communicated through the game, or if they were sitting nearby someone who was playing, then they'd talk in the real world, like in a cyber cafe, but it would be in a lab. So that's how they communicated, and yeah.
Now, obviously, the people who are doing this through phone lines at home are interacting through microcomputers.
Yeah.
Now, did you create some kind of specialized interface? Was this simply now I can't remember, what do you call it again? No, I used to log on to Unix systems and the like.
Well, it was when you logged on to, we had a project programmer number, PPN it was called, and when you logged on, it immediately ran MUD. You didn't have access to the operating system, the shell as it would be in Unix. You didn't have access to that. It immediately ran MUD, so you couldn't do anything once you'd got out of it. We started out where you could. You had to, when it first started out, people started to play and they had to type MUD to run MUD, but some of them didn't. Some of them just created enormous files that locked up the whole file system, because that's what some people are like. So we eventually made it so that, in effect, when you logged in, you were straight into MUD. What's your name? Internal players would actually have to type MUD from their own academic or computer society account to play it.
Gotcha. Did you have to make any adjustments for the various home systems based off of number of amount of text on screen and so forth?
No. Though when we first started, we were playing MUD on teletypes. They're 110 baud. I can type faster than 110 baud, roughly 10 or 11 bits per second. So there were already things built in. When you went to a room that you'd already been to, it didn't give you the long description, it just gave you the short description. If you wanted the long description again, you would type luck, or you'd go into verbose mode, which always typed the long description. So externally, they're originally 300 baud. Then the modems went to 1275, which meant from the mainframe to the user, 1200. So you got them quite quickly. But upload was 75, which was even slower than But if most of what you're typing is W return, W return, W return, not N return, it's west, 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 north, then that didn't matter much because you weren't typing a lot. And if you were typing some text to send to somebody, it might be some buffering involved, but you wouldn't notice it. And people use Telnet to connect from outside. We didn't have a client for it. People just played using Telnet. That meant that anything that had Telnet could play Mud.
Gotcha. Yes, Telnet was the word I couldn't think of for a second.
Yeah.
It's been too long.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're getting these people coming in, logging on and playing the game. You have all this work going on. So we're starting now into your PhD. We get around 81 when you start your PhD.
Yeah.
What's the status of MUD when you make the decision to go into artificial intelligence?
It was, at that point, it was called MUD 1. Because, well, actually it wasn't called MUD 1. We always called it MUD. But other people started to, who were playing the game, there was a big article in Personal Computer World that came out, written, strangely enough, by Sue the Witch, which kind of publicised the game beyond what we had publicised it in Practical Computing. And so people tried it then. And in the 82, 83, they started writing their own games inspired by MUD. And because they were doing that, they needed a generic term for this kind of game, and they called them MUDs. I'm writing a MUD, which meant that our MUD, which was called MUD, was it had the same name as the general class. So they started calling our MUD MUD 1, even though it was version 3. So at that point, MUD became MUD 1. I later rewrote it as MUD 2, which is version 4. So that was a situation. People were coming in from the outside, playing MUD, thinking, I can do that, or I can do that better. Some of them did it. Some of them did do it better. People played their games, and some of the people who played theirs thought, I can do that, or I want to do that, or I'll try doing that, or I don't like that, I want to do it this way. And they would try their own games and so on. And because of that, it all propagated. And ultimately, that's why most MMOs are descended from MUD, because we weren't the only people to have the idea of a shared environment that people can log into as individuals to be themselves, persistent, shared, not real. We weren't the only ones to have it. The concept was invented independently at least another 5 times.
Gotcha.
Yeah, there was. Well, I mean, some of those were based on Dungeons and Dragons. Sceptre of Goth, which was by Alan Cleats, and that was like a contemporary of MUD. I think we were got MUD out first, but it was a matter of weeks. But anyway, but there's other ones. There was Avatar on the Plato system, Island of Kesmai, which was Kelton Flynn, John Taylor. There was graphical one, Habitat, Randy Farmer and Chip Morningstar, the best names in games industry. Randy Farmer is an occupation. Chip Morningstar, that sounds like a space cadet. Those are great names. And there was another one about many years later, about 10 years after, or 11 years after MUD, that was it only really played into the development of social worlds because it was so late, but it did play into them. That was at the University of Washington, or somewhere in the Northwest, and in Northwest University or something like that. I don't know.
Gotcha. Now, so you start your PhD work. How much time are you actually dedicating to MUD development when you make that decision? And has it affected the rest of your academic life at that point? This sounds like it's a big project.
Well, it is a big project. It fairly settled down then. I did add some more and more things and keep the bug things going away. But gradually, particularly once I became a lecturer, I handed over the keys to other students who, I mean, I still had overall authority for it, but I let other students mess around with it and write their own games using the Mud engine, if that's the right word, code base. So Mud itself didn't occupy a lot, as much of my time as it could have done. But I did obviously still play it and did keep tabs on what was going on. But that receded into the background once I became a lecturer, because it's not really right to fraternise with the students like that if you're a lecturer. There's a power imbalance.
Well, come on, you could have just chosen a new identity. I mean, you could have been Jane.
Well, I did
something.
play. I mean, I did make Wizard on Mud playing incognito. Not as Jane. I think it was as Cézanne, the painter. But I did do that, yeah. And I did introduce female characters. We didn't have female characters originally in Roy's Mud, because he'd written all the documentation using female pronouns, and so thought, well, okay, I'll make the game using male pronouns. So he did. Most of our players were male, but that didn't really affect it. It was basically odd and even, and he'd started with females, they went to males. But I added gender into Mud so that you could have female characters. And most of the aim for Mud was that people would be playing the game, but not as their real world self, but as to discover who they really were. I mean, that was the aim of it. You were meant to be able to play it, to be freed from your real world self. And when people were playing it, they weren't really role playing it. They were playing it as themselves. Like if you were sitting down playing a board game with your friend, and you'd be playing it with your friend, and that's how it was. But I wanted them to experiment with their identity, because that's what the game was offering you, is you get to find out who you are by being somebody else, and by being somebody else who then becomes and you become then, both of you become the same person, and then you know who you are. So I wanted them to role play. So when I introduced the agenda, I created a character called Polly, who was basically, it was a debug character. Polly's a popular name for parrots in the UK. There was a play about it in the 1700s where some guy just kept parroting other people's words in Italian, not knowing what they meant, and his name was Polly, Mr. Polly, or Polly something. So that's where it basically comes from. So I had created this character called Polly, who was a parrot, and that was a debug character anyway. And when it came to adding gender, I thought, okay, well, obviously Polly's female because it's a female name. So I had Polly. Everybody knew I was Polly. They knew Polly was female. They knew I wasn't female. But that tipped them off that they could be someone that they weren't. Everybody knew who the real person was, because in effect, you just know who they are because they're nearby playing you, unless they've found a hidden terminal somewhere. But they didn't all play as female characters, obviously. I mean, but some people would start acting sneaky, being thieves or something, and other people would be more bold than they were in real life. They would wear different personalities to see how they fitted, to see which ones were best, and whether they were close to who they were or distant, and they were somewhere in between. So Polly worked out quite well there. Well, it was a bit of a risk because I think back then it was still, back then it was still illegal to be gay in the UK from under the age of 21. And I would be 20, I think, when I did that, put gender into Mud. So, I guess there was a risk, but I'm not gay, so so I wasn't. But nevertheless, you could see why people might not be role playing if there are societal constraints on role playing.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I mean, there's certain taboos that are going to cross over into that social structure. Now, given the idea that you're trying to give people this freedom, was there any consideration about the types of interactions that they could have with one another beyond the stabby, stabby, kill each other?
Well, yeah, they could help each other, they could do things together, but ultimately the game was a stabby, stabby, kill. It was a sword and sorcery game. You didn't have to kill each other. I mean, there was plenty of monsters who were out to kill you and so on, and there was a lot of not so much puzzle solving as strategic thinking that you had to do for the gameplay. But I didn't put in any commands like, you know, having sex with other characters or anything like that. The university would probably have stopped it if I'd done that, because although universities are fine with people killing one another, they're not fine with people procreating. So that I didn't put anything like that in. It wasn't what the game was about. People did do that. We did get what was later called tiny sex because of a social world called Tiny Mud that came out of it, or net sex, some people called it, because people would do it in chat programs. But, you know, where essentially it's the when I'm explaining this, I usually use a tennis analogy rather than so it's
okay.
I toss the ball in the air and smash it towards you. I see it coming and deftly flick back. Caressing the ball with my racket, I chip it over the net. I anticipate your moves with excitement. And so that's the, you know, but people would do that with having sex instead. And it still goes on to this day. There are certain servers on World of Warcraft where if you go to Goldshire, then if you're a newbie, you will be met with some horrific experiences, or it's not, maybe not horrific, but certainly alarming. So yes, it still goes on, but we weren't really about that then. It was because no one had seen anything like this before. I mean, it was, what, these are other people, yeah, and I can talk to them, yeah, and well, he's hitting me, yeah, he can do that. What should I do? What would you do if someone hit you? I'd run away. Well, run away, flee. Oh, okay. So yeah, there was a lot of new ground, and it's hard to explain to people today just what it was like, how really but really different, novel that the whole thing was. It just, people had not seen anything like that before, and so it was a very powerful concept. Nowadays, it's not, because people see them earlier and go used to it. Again, something that when I was young, I'd never been to London. It was way too far away. The closest I got was Wembley Stadium for a football match. So when I was a student and I went to London, I thought, oh, wow, this is amazing. There's 10 Downing Street. There's Buckingham Palace. I hadn't realised I was so close. I'm actually walking towards Buckingham Palace. This is amazing. And yet my kids never got to feel that. And the reason they didn't, because they went on a school trip to London when they were like 7. So it wasn't, it didn't have the significance. Oh, yeah, I've been to London, seen that. Yeah, seen the Crown Jewels, seen those things. Yeah, but it was just part of your reality, but it wasn't for mine. It was the first time I'd seen it. And it's the same thing with MUDs. The first time you saw it was like Buckingham Palace, your sense of awe and wonder. But now people have seen too many things like them before, so it's part of their reality. So yeah, you can look at the architecture of the past by looking at MUDs, but you can't recapture the inhabitants. It's like looking at Pompeii. You know what the people there did and where they did it, but you don't know why they did it, how they did it. You have to try and divine what their lives were, but you don't know, really.
No, I totally understand. I mean, as someone who grew up with computers. I'm born in '76, but all those early experiences. Every time that you saw something new, I mean, that was the joy of going to the arcade.
Yeah.
It was like, what's the new thing? Oh my God, how many colors are on that screen? Or, oh, the sprites are getting larger as they get closer to you. No, that's not possible. I mean, yeah.
My summer job before I went to university was working in an amusement arcade. That's what my job was.
Oh.
I used to call bingo in an amusement arcade, and I'd be in the morning. I'd go in and clean all the machines and play pinball and all this stuff for free. So I did get to play a lot of those early games. I'm actually hopeless at Space Invaders, absolutely, and I'm hopeless at Pong, of all things. Pong, it's like a bullet hell for me. I just can't. Anyway.
No, I totally understand. As someone who worked in a video arcade as a teenager during the one-on-one fighting craze, and who is also quite helpless at those games, I feel your pain. I really do.
A kindred soul.
So now you have it's 81. You're starting this work. I really want to talk here about the status of understanding of what an artificial intelligence could contribute to a game at that point in time. Because 81, we are also already getting the microcomputers are coming in. The Trinity is there. There's more and more games being developed that are mostly or almost exclusively single-player experiences in that realm. So, do you have any hands-on experience with any of those products as you're starting to look at it in artificial intelligence, and do they influence MUD development at all?
I didn't have access to them because I couldn't afford a PC. I don't come from a wealthy background. Although they were present I could read about them in the computer magazines, but I didn't own one. But we could all see that graphics were coming. It was obvious that they were going to come, but and I've got less artistic ability than a brick has. I mean, I'm not very good at art, at drawing things. Even my handwriting's near unreadable. So I was never going to be able to do any of the art myself, but we all knew it was coming, but it wouldn't come until PCs were big enough and there was some way that people could connect to computers at very low cost, because in the UK we were really held back by the price of phone calls, whereas in the US, where local calls were basically free, people could play games on there. So in terms of artificial intelligence, the kind of AI that I studied was called planning. This is the good old-fashioned AI stuff, which is all symbolic rather than statistical. So planning is, these are the actions that I am able to do. This is the initial situation. This is the situation I want to pertain. How can I string the actions that I am able to do together such that it gets me from the initial situation to the final situation? And in general, it sounds like it's a search problem, because essentially you've got a node, a start node, and you've got actions that take you to other nodes, which give you new states, and then you go from there. It's a little more complicated than that, because the states, the actions are parameterized. Do I pick up block A, or do I pick up block B, or block C? So that leads you to more states, and sometimes there are so many possible objects that you can't possibly expand all the states. Which of these grains of sand do I pick up? I don't care, just a grain of sand will do. But my particular area of research was what was called cross-level planning. In that, my work was able to create plans that contained other plans, and not just the sense of, and then I'll finish it off. because it's quite easy to if you have a planning system and you stop it halfway through and then say, well, look, it's got a plan to get to this stage, and then the rest of it's just and make another plan. So I had a system though that could embed plans. So the example I gave was the Colchester bus plan problem. So you want to go from the university to Colchester, nearby town, and you want to buy someone a birthday present. And you're thinking, what birthday present do I need to buy? Oh no, the bus is coming. I need to catch the bus. So my plan is I will go to the bus stop, get on the bus. While I am on the bus, I will decide what to buy and where. Then I'll get off the bus. Then I'll go to where I decided, and then I'll execute the plan that I thought of on the bus. So it's got an action, and then it's got a reference to the output of the action later on. So I did that, and even today, planning systems can't do that. Not that it made any impact, because planning systems stopped becoming relevant once people started going with the statistical models that came in the 80s, from which we have now the neural networks and diffusion models slightly later on.
Okay, so moving away from trying to be efficient with the moves, if I'm oversimplifying it, to just brute force it with the most likely successful answer. Am I oversimplifying? No, probably.
Well, no, it's no, the AI that came along afterwards, Hinton's work, was more along the lines of training. You do something and it stores how it's done. Then you do it again, it stores how it's done. But it doesn't just remember that one combination. It remembers it in a certain format of different layers, such that something doesn't have to be a perfect match for it to be able to have some idea of what it means and what you should do. So for something like character recognition, you point the camera at the letter A in dozens of different typefaces. Then you show it a letter A in a typeface it hasn't come across before, but it knows it's an A because enough of it matches what it's had before. Then it goes through the neural network and says, out of all the things, that looks like it's an A. So that's the kind that was coming on. There's also adversarial networks and other things. The problem that I had, and that all PhD students who want to do this have, is that you want to create characters who are believable. You want them to act like real people would act. So they've got to be believable. And as soon as you utter that word believable, your PhD becomes about believability. How do you measure believability? Oh, so not only do I have to make this thing with believable characters, I then have to grab a whole bunch of people, show them it, and ask them whether they think it's believable or not. And the whole PhD descends into it, and does to this day. And one of my former undergraduate students, she went on to do a PhD. She was looking at this for her game, and she found that you say, this is a car. Is it being driven by a human or by an AI? And people say, well, that's being driven by a human because it's driving really well. But people also say, that's being driven by an AI because it's driving really well. They're the same reason to justify why it was a human or an AI. And so believability, the wheels fall off. But in the games industry, they don't have to worry about that. They don't have to test things before to academic standards. If the designer thinks this will be believable, then the designer can put it in. If it is believable, it's fine, and if it isn't, then the players will laugh. But so they don't have those constraints that we have in academia that, in some ways, hold us back a lot.
Oh, I understand. So this definitional problem of what qualifies as believable, at what point have you proven believability, that would be a nightmare, because Did you accept it? I mean, I guess it's, in a way, it's the Turing test of, could you tell it was a human? Was it believable as an answer or not?
Well, we didn't expect the players to believe that they were human any more than we expected them to believe that the land of mud was real. But we did want them to have, well, today it would be called lower cognitive load. When you're reading a book, you're willing yourself to disbelieve the fact that the book is fiction. But when you're playing a mud, you're willing yourself to believe something you know is false is true. So you try, you know it's not true, but you want it to be true, and you want to be immersed in the world, because if the world behaves like the real world does, except for in a few cases like magic works and stuff, then there's less to distract you, and also you can make more plans. You say, if I do this, what's that non-player character going to do? How are they going to react? And you can develop a theory of mind for one that's believable, but you can't develop a theory of mind for one that's just a signal response system. So,
understand.
Yeah, it's well, we really wanted to make the world immersive, because we wanted people to feel that it was an alternative to the real world. And if your brain's been hardwired through years of millions of years of evolution to be able to generate images inside your imagination, and to accept and critically information coming into it, then we need to be able to make sure that that doesn't get in the way and in fact enhances the experience. So that's why we wanted people to be immersed, and the more things you put in that reduce the plausibility of the world, then the harder it becomes to maintain that sense that the world you're visiting really is a separate, independent world from reality, which is the world you're escaping.
Understand. That's a tall order. So definitely a tall order. You said your PhD took 6 years, right?
Yeah, it did. Well, it would have taken 3. I was all set to write it up, but the government, in its wisdom, said all PhD students need to write up right now what it is they're doing. We've had so many students who about 50% of the PhD students that start don't finish. So we want each student to write a report. So I had to write a report, and the report took me a month, which if I hadn't written the report, I would have spent writing the thesis. But because I had to write the report, I couldn't write the thesis because I was writing the report. And then my grant was only for 3 years, but I got the job as a lecturer, which meant that I was still able to submit without having to pay PhD fees. So that really slowed me down. And although I kept up with the reading for the PhD, I couldn't really do the writing because I was teaching and preparing lectures and so on. So when I decided that I needed to leave the university, essentially because I didn't fit. I was all the other people there were middle class, and I was working class, and it didn't fit back in the day. I had the someone wanting to make mud with me as a commercial venture. So I thought, right, I'll resign from the university and I'll spend the summer, which I had, working out my notice on my PhD. So I did that, and I wrote the PhD up. There was a limit of, I think, 80,000 words, and I was a few hundred words over it. So I had to keep cutting it down. So instead of cross-level planning, which is 3 words, it became CLP. I changed lots of occurrences of some words. There was one particular I remember. I abbreviated "it is" into "it's," IT apostrophe S, which saved me 300 words or something. But I had it. Then it cost me time, because I was looking through, and one of the sentences said, sometimes this is not the case, but other times it's. So I had to go check every single occurrence of it's that I'd changed to make sure it wasn't like that. And eventually I added it, and I think I was about 3 words under the limit. I mean, it was really close to the limit, and I had to write my own word counting system to make sure that I got it counting words right, because if it includes code, fragments of code, is a square bracket on its own a word? Oh no, that's not a word. So yeah, but anyway, yes, that's why it took me 6 years, which was yeah. I handed it in just about 3 days before it was due. And then when I had my thesis examination, the guy said, "This is pretty good stuff, after the Viva, but this section here, this chapter here, doesn't seem really all that relevant." And I said, "So if I take that out, you'll give me a PhD?" And they looked at each other and said, "Yeah." So I said, "Right, it's gone." And half an hour later, it was gone. and I got the PhD. So yes, with minor modifications that didn't take me all that long, just remove it, and there it was. So if I hadn't put it in the first place, then I would have had a lot more. I wouldn't have had to do all the editing down. But on the other hand, if I hadn't put it in the first time, they'd have found something else to make me do. So
they're just looking for something to contribute so that they can justify why they're there. Okay, maybe too harsh. Being too harsh.
Yes. But if you give them something, if you give a PhD examiner something that's clearly wrong, then they will spend a lot of time telling you about that, rather than the thing that you really don't want them to ask you to do. So yeah, there is some there are some tactics involved if you're a gamer.
Now, before you got the PhD, there was an attempt to turn MUD into a commercial product in, I believe, 1984. What was the thinking there? How did that get started?
Well, I think it was a bit later than that. We saw that other people were making money from it, and we thought, okay, well, why don't we try? I was approached by one of the players who was a publisher, but worked in book publishing, Simon Daly, very smart. And he said, "Well, would you like to set up a company to do this?" We set it up in, I think, 85. And then we attempted to get it onto a number of, commercial systems. And there were several. There was CompuNet, which was a UK version of CompuServe in America. There was CompuServe itself in the USA. There were other ones in the USA as well, but CompuServe was the biggest one. And we started to rewrite it as MUD2, as it became known, because we needed a mainframe to run MUD1. So we did MUD2, and then we were planning, in fact, we did license it out to a number of people running like bulletin board systems. All the while we kept it on the university mainframe for free, because we wanted people to be able to play it for free, but not everybody could get access to the university computer. So that's what we did. But in the UK, we were held back rather heavily by the price of telephone calls at the time, which was very expensive. I mean, you'd think they were expensive even if that same 1985 money was charged today. I mean, the USA had much less expensive phone calls, and local calls were effectively free in the US. So they had the big five information providers, as they call themselves. It was CompuServe and Delphi and Prodigy and Genie and what was the other one? And another one. I think eventually became AOL, and they were the ones that they had fingers in all over the place. But so we approached CompuServe. They liked the game. We went over there. I got it running on their mainframe, which was very easy. The main problem, which was that they used a slightly different operating system call that meant you couldn't see any of the text on the screen. I just had to change like one line and, okay, well, I could have done that from home, couldn't I? I didn't have to go to Columbus, Ohio to do it. But CompuServe games represented about 50% of their income.
Wow.
Yeah, but only about 10% of their users. So they had an uneasy relationship with them. They wanted people to sign up for what they called noble content, things like children's education, following stock exchanges and so on. But the people who were playing games was playing, and not just Mud. I mean, there was others there. Island of Kesmai being the other main MMORPG, as we now call them. And they were doing well, but games weren't treated well, and CompuServe had a very I wouldn't call it fraught, but they looked down on games quite heavily. I remember having one conversation where our royalty was 8%. So of all the money that was taken in, we got 8%, and CompuServe itself got 92% of the money generated by our game. I remember a conversation with the game's product manager where he was asking me to explain why I felt we deserved 8%.
What?
Yeah. And what can you say? Why do you deserve only 92%? Isn't that enough of you? These are our users, are our computers, are our time. Yeah, but they're playing our game, and they wouldn't be paying you a bean if it wasn't for us. So that wasn't good. There was other systems that were much more games friendly. Genie was far more game friendly. Bill Loudon, really nice guy. He ran that. I think he left CompuServe to do it, and again, it wasn't treated seriously. We weren't on Genie, but some of the other games that were quite were quite important. Some of the other MUDs, but again, they were using computers run by General Electric that didn't need them for the evenings, and so they let people play games on them, but they didn't give them any support. They wouldn't expand them as the business outgrew what General Electric had anyway, and eventually it was too claustrophobic. They couldn't add to the products because there wasn't the mainframes, and General Electric just looked at them as a cash cow. So Genie was there, but that's where the best games were at the time. Gotcha. Because they were taken on by gamers.
Now, so this was mainly just a way of licensing the software out to service providers. Was there ever any consideration of starting up MUD or as some kind of service of itself, or other than just the setting up your own servers?
Yeah, we did. We did for MUD 2. We set up a server in London because of the phone calls. Essentially, it was just punishingly high. So we set one up in London because lots of people in London and other people. There was one up in Scotland. There was a server there. There's one in Canada which still runs. So
really?
Yeah. Mud2.org, I think it is. Oh, I think it's that. Yeah. But I mean, they don't get I mean, our one that was in London still runs. You can still play it. Mud II, because it's 2 in Roman numerals. .co.uk. But we don't publicise them. We don't charge money for them now because no one will pay for these things. And so we did do that. We also there was a system run by British Telecom called Prestel, which was it used telephones, but you could do things on your computer and on your television and with the connection, and it would be things like what's on television tomorrow or what's the latest news. But there was a subsection of it called Microlink run independently, and they had games. And we approached BT it wasn't British Telecom, it was the Post Office that was in the process of being nationalised. So we approached British Telecom about it, and they said, yeah, speak, we'll put you on, Prestel, you speak to the Micronet guys. And so we spoke to them and explained everything, what we wanted to do, and BT bought us a piece of hardware, and I had to rewrite Mud completely to run on their hardware, which would use an operating system called OS 9, which is like a really stripped down Unix. But I managed to do it, got it running and everything on what we called the Mud box. But because BT was being nationalised, it kept convolving, changing shape. When we started out, we were talking to people at director level, and this is a director level of a company that was basically £1, £1. That's their profit every second. £1. That's how much money they were making back in the days when the average wage was whatever, £8,000. So they were very profitable. We started off speaking to the managing director, and they put us on this this VAC system, which we made Mud run on it. Then the people who ran the VAC system themselves, they were using it for something else in the day, and us in the evening. Then they started using it for other things in the evening, and it became harder. You know, we were getting fewer time slices. So we were talking, instead of the director of the BT, we were talking to the one in charge of the VAC system, and then they subdivided it. We were talking to the guy in charge of the server farm, and it kept going down and down and down. We got given this Mud box because the VAX was taken away, but that looked good, and we were in touch with this guy Tony Sweet, who was the Prestel guy, who'd Prestel and the rest of BT. There was bad blood between them for some reason. We never found out why. Tony Sweet, no problem with him. He's a good guy. But everything kept getting changed beneath us. Another problem was that when we had first gone to Prestel to Microlink to try and get Mud on it, we set it all up and showed how to do it, and they had a problem because it was a screen at a time. So you got a full screen at a time, and we explained how you could make it so it looked like it was scrolling up, which is what we wanted. And we had Mud running on that, but then the bigger BT people said, no, you can't have it, we want it now, and stopped us from doing it. So they took another Mud called Shades, which was written by a Mud 1 player, Neil Newell, and Shades really took off on Micronet. It was making £70,000 a year.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, which I would like £70,000 a year now.
Yeah, but back then it was.
Yeah,
the dollar was almost 3 to 1 with the pound.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah, so it was doing really
tremendous.
Well. Yeah, but we weren't getting it because of this internal dispute between the different divisions of BT, because they were all fighting at the higher levels for their own little kingdoms. And eventually, they wouldn't let us put Mud to, even though we had a Mud box, they wouldn't let us attach it to Prestel. And eventually the product was signed off by a youth opportunities program person, basically a kid who had signed up for like 6 months to get some job experience, and he was put in charge of it. So we went from managing director to youth opportunities in the space of 3 or 4 years, however long it was. So our commercial ventures didn't work out. We were doing reasonably okay. We on our own servers, which we launched Mud 2 on. They were doing quite well. Because there were some people who did have enough money to play. But then, remember I mentioned Simon Daly, the publishing guy who was our director. Turned out that he had what back then was called manic depression. Today it's bipolar syndrome, and he suddenly it took hold of him. He'd had it before and got over it, and he was having to take this lithium when he had it, and he didn't really like that at all. And then it came back, and essentially he went mad. I mean, the mania of it, and then at times he was, crying over newspaper articles that were really, really sad, but they weren't sad enough to make regular people cry. We were really worried about him. And his mother was a psychiatrist, and Harley Street, which is where all the best private clinics are in the UK. So she was a quite high-powered psychiatrist. And Simon himself, his family was quite wealthy. They owned like £1 million house in the Cotswolds, very beautiful. And so he spoke to his mother and everything, but eventually he'd been manic, and he'd come down again, and he was normal, and he was about to go into depression again, and he couldn't take it. He just did not want that feeling of depression, and he shot himself, killed himself.
Oh, tragic.
Yeah, which really, it was bad for him, particularly since the next year Prozac was invented and would really have, at least it would really have helped him. But so that knocked us back a bit as well. He'd written a will, leaving his shares in Mud to me and Roy Trubshaw, but he'd got the will witnessed by two employees of his brothers. That his office, where we used to work, was in an office run by his brothers. So he got 2 people to witness it, but there is employees, and they said, "Oh, actually, although we signed it to say that we saw him do it, we didn't actually see him sign it. We just signed to say we'd seen it, and therefore the will's not valid, and therefore the brothers got his shares, and we had to buy the brothers out, which meant we had no money left."
Oh, geez.
Yeah. Yes, it's a comedy of errors. Then we went off to Interplay in the US. They were interested in it because they had a games product manager there, Richard Mulligan, who had been at Genie, really knew his stuff, and he invited us over to get Mud working, and they got a guy writing a client for it so that it looked pretty and worked and everything, and that was going really well, until the guy decided that some of the other things that Interplay was working on were too militaristic. He'd been in the I think the Air Force or something, and he didn't want to. He'd become a pacifist, so he didn't want to work there anymore. So he left, and then they put someone else in charge. We didn't really know who they were or anything, but Richard Mulligan was really pulling this, getting everything done, and fighting our corner until he decided that, he revealed that he'd been living in the wrong body for the past however many decades, and he was actually female inside and wanted to be transitioned to Jessica Mulligan, which he duly did, and she's been Jessica Mulligan for years. And we're still in touch, and Yeah, and still the same wry, witty person, but Interplay kind of shunned her. They said that it was an error of judgment and stuff, and sidelined her, and she didn't get anyone listened to her. Mud being one of her projects got pushed down as well, but they wouldn't let go of the contract. We wanted to, we'd signed an exclusive deal with them, and we wanted to run it on other things, but we couldn't because they wouldn't answer our emails, our letters. So in the end, it was okay. So the French version that we wanted to run, that a guy is actually translating for us right now, we can't run because you won't give up the contract. You won't even acknowledge it. So in the end, I wrote to them and said, I'm annulling this contract. Basically, sue me if you want to. And they didn't, because that would have cost them money. So that, yeah. But you live and learn. I mean, could have been good, could have been bad. Just turned out to be bad, which is often a way for pioneers. The ones who follow are the ones who don't make the mistakes that you made when you were going first, that you didn't know were going to be mistakes. So I'm sorry to have ranted and bored you with all this.
No, not at all. Not at all. It explains a lot about why it didn't get the widespread recognition that it should have had, or at least the market acceptance.
Yeah.
Now,
sorry, carry on.
Oh no, I was going to ask when it was at Interplay, what years approximately was that?
Let me just have a look at my my web page. It probably says there. 94 to 96.
94 to 96. Okay. And so that would have been a PC client then at that point for internet use, not for direct dial-up anymore.
No, it would have been direct dial-up. But it would have been both in effect, yes.
Okay.
The internet had just become available to people. They were still running it, some games on services like AOL, making an awful lot of money, because they were charging per hour or per minute, time-based charging. We also had competition from the several thousand free MUDs that were still out there. At the point just before the World Wide Web came along and graphics started sucking up the bandwidth, MUDs, I think I mentioned this, were 11% of the internet. The traffic on the internet were MUDs. Obviously now it's video and streaming services that occupy most of it, but still that's a fair chunk. But there was a couple of thousand Diku MUDs around. I mean, there was lots of these games. When people wanted to play, when people had heard about the internet, so they sign up. In the US, it was with America Online, AOL, at one point producing 50% of the world's pre-formatted floppies. And people went on to AOL to see what this internet's about. And of course, there wasn't a great deal of content. So they wanted to play games. And so AOL signed up some games. We couldn't go with MUD because we were with MUD 1 because it was stuck with CompuServe, and we couldn't go with MUD 2 because that was tied up with Interplay. So we were trapped. But I mean, we could have written a MUD 3, which was MUD 2 with extra content, I guess. But we're kind of honest. so the games that they put on there were on AOL really soaked up money, and Gemstone and Dragon's Gate and Federation 2, which was a British game. So they took a lot of money in for about two years. And I mean, one game that was regarded as failing, that was Neverwinter Night, that was still making $500,000 a year.
Yeah.
So, but what happened was people on small bulletin board systems started offering access to the internet, and they were charging a flat rate. And people started thinking, well, why am I on AOL paying all this money to access content every time? Every hour I'm logged in, I'm accessing it, when I could just go onto this other system, and then I can access, my film sites and chat rooms and things essentially for free once I've signed up. So eventually AOL had to capitulate and go flat rate. And when it did, that kicked the ground out from under where the MUDs were. And that they had to make a decision. Do we also go flat rate and accept much lower income? Or do we say, no, we're going to set up our own servers. We only need 10% of the people we've got from AOL to go on them, and we'll be wearing money hats. So they did set up their own servers, and 10% of the AOL players didn't go to them, and they weren't wearing money hats. Because essentially what has happened, they had what we called a newbie hose. So new players, there was a jet of new players directed at them. And when you cut that off, then the people who were playing loved the games because, well, they were good games, but they couldn't get any other players because they had, the advertising, where you send them. And so it was a disaster, but it did make the regular games industry, the non-MUD ones, the ones who were making single player games, sit up and think, if we could get maybe 20,000 people and charge them a flat rate rather than per hour, we could maybe make a profit. So can we do that? Maybe we'd only need, I think 10,000 might have been enough. If they could just get 10,000 people to sign up for a flat rate, then they'd be making profit. So that's where the Ultima Online, Meridian 59 and EverQuest were kind of coming from that direction, thinking maybe we'll get that many players.
Well, as someone who was a paid beta tester for Ultima Online back in the day,
I
ordered the disc. I remember it's like, here's I think it was $5 or $10. Give me that disc.
Yeah. Well, Electronic Arts were they were not sure that it was going to work, and they were not giving them the Origin the money that they needed for that. So Origin thought, well, we've got all these people who might want to play, but we can't afford to send them the discs. So let's just see if we charge them money. So they did that, and so many people signed up that they realised, whoa, we're going to have a hit on our hands here. At which point Electronic Arts took notice and did give them some more funding, and they did get to finish the game. So it was paid access. The reason they wanted you to pay, because they literally couldn't afford to make them. It wasn't that they were trying to steal people's.
And we totally understood it. I mean, heck, it was just, we understand. You got to send me something physical. This sounds amazing. And it also benefited from the existing IP. You knew Ultima. It was something you could hang your hat on.
Yeah.
Now, so MUD, you're in this position now where you have the two MUDs. They're tied up license-wise. And you said, you could have made a MUD 3, which was, just MUD 2 with more content. Did you ever consider just creating a brand new game, or would that have also been tied up in the contracts?
No, a brand new game wouldn't have been tied up in the contract. Yeah, we did think of doing some other games, but you need capital, and we didn't have any. So that was that. We did start another game. There was a company called Wireplay in the UK, which was run by, it was a part of British Telecom. And I went to some conferences and I met the guy in charge of it, Colin Duffy, another really nice guy. And he was, this was about the point of the dot-com boom. And he wanted to set up a gaming system. The idea being that, well, back then people didn't know how to monetize people, but they effectively said the more users we've got, then we'll get them, and then we'll figure out how to monetize them. So he hooked up with another company that sold games discs. So they were like Amazon, but instead of books, they were selling games. And the idea was that you'd go on Wireplay and you'd play games on Wireplay, and while you were there, they would advertise the games and they would make money by selling you the games. So you didn't have to play MUD, but it would nevertheless get some money in. So I was taken on as head of online games at Wireplay when the new company that came out. I think it was originally called Gameplay or something like that on BT, and it was Wireplay when it came out. Anyway, so they had an office in Colchester, so I worked in there, and I got a team together. We couldn't do MUD 2, but they wanted something fairly quick, and we had text. So the argument went something like this: you've got a game engine already ready to go, and it uses text. We want to attract a diverse range of people, and what can you do with text? Who will play a text game in this day and age? And we think, well, women like text. They read that more than men do. Men are more that just is stereotypically speaking. We're more likely to get women playing this game than we're going to playing on a text game than we're going to get men, because women have got the language part of the brain and the men have got the spatial part of the brain. So if we get women playing, then we'll have a game. And they said, well, how are we going to get the men playing? Because there's a lot more men who want to play games than women. And well, if the women are playing, then the men will also play. And the idea crystallized around what was basically, it's not exactly pornography, but it was a game that was, it was non-violent, but what was combat in a regular game would be if basically making love in this game. So it's called Hot Hotel, and the idea was that you would be a traveling person out in the middle of nowhere in the USA, and you'd be in this hotel, and you walked out of your room, and then it was a surrounding area and the different streets and or avenues and streets or whatever order it was, with different things, and you'd go to ones that were to do with your particular predilection and things like that. And that was the idea of the game, and we were actually making pretty good progress with it. But the company Gameplay expanded way too big. They just took on lots of people. I was head of online games, but I found out there were two other people who also had the title head of online games, but they were different online games. There was, I had 1, 2, 3, 4, I think 5 people working under me. And that was the same as the number of people who were working on, do you remember WAP? W-A-P? Yeah, on WAP games. So there were 6 people employed to work on WAP games. They didn't have any WAP games. They had about well, half a dozen pages that you could look at on your little stupid WAP phone, but that's all they had, and there was 6 of them. So they had a hiring freeze just as I was appointing a producer, and it was very frustrating, because what I should have done was go out into the street, throw a rock, and the first person it hit I would employ as a producer. Then later on I could dismiss them and replace them with an actual producer. That's what I should have done, but I didn't. I actually did it properly by interviewing people. So we were trapped there. That's the point at which we decided we'd better go with this idea of the adult game. And because prior to that we were thinking we'd be doing a graphical world. It was resources that meant that that's what we had to do, because we couldn't develop something without any people. So we had to use what we already had, and that was the text game. And so that's how it came about that we were working on that. It was for a hiring freeze. Wireplay, I bought some shares for that. 1,400 shares I bought. At one point they were worth, I paid I think £1 a share, and at one point they were worth 10 times that much. But I wasn't allowed to sell them because I'd bought them as part of the opening deal. By the time I was allowed to sell them, they were worth 1 penny. Because the people at the top of the company, not Colin Duffy, the other people, basically siphoned off all the money by having contracts with other companies they just happened to own, and they took a lot of the cash out. We weren't bringing in enough to pay everybody. We certainly weren't bringing enough to pay the consultancy fees or whatever it was that the companies that they owned had. So that was essentially what I was told, what happened to the company, and it closed down. But some of us from there were still thinking, we could make this game that we wanted to make. So we got together, we formed another company called Immersive. Now, the people who we wanted to be in it were in it, but 2 other people insinuated themselves in it because they happened to be appear at the meeting where we set it all up. One of them was a guy who he made games for the Game Boy, and he wanted us all to move to Oxford, and we didn't want to move to Oxford, but he was supposed to be the managing director, and he was doing okay, but he stopped really doing anything at all. I was doing all the MD stuff, and I was supposed to be the chief creative director, but I was writing the design document and all these other things, and the technical specs Roy was doing. We had a great guy on from BT, Andy Pentney, I think that was his son. In fact, that was his first name. But anyway, he was good at running servers and things like that, and anything to do with that side of the aspects. But the MD, he didn't do anything, and he wouldn't quit. And the reason he wouldn't do anything was because his Game Boy business was suddenly taking off. So he didn't really want to work for us, but he also didn't want to give up any control in case we did something good. The other problem we had was the chief finance officer, because somebody who was interested in games and money was at the time very difficult to find. But we did have this guy. I won't give you his name because he may sue. What happened was he did know quite a bit about games, but he made this spreadsheet about based on how much it was going to cost, because we wanted to raise money, and he created a spreadsheet, and with the information that I and Roy had given him, and it was quite big and impressive. But I showed it to one of my the people who'd been working at Gameplay and said, "What do you think of this?" And he's came back and said, "Well, my dad's an accountant, but I didn't show it to him. I didn't need to show it to him because look, see this column here on the last page where it adds up these three numbers? Yeah, that one's in dollars, that one's in euros, that one's in pounds. He's added them all up." Oh, goodness gracious. Okay, so our chief finance officer is not quite as capable as we perhaps thought he might be. We did raise money. We raised about, I think we raised $3 million, but it was promised we needed to raise 5 million. If we could get the other 2 million, then we had those, but we didn't get them, get the other money. So the guy, after he gave us a long time, gave us a year or more to get the other money, but we couldn't get it because the MD wouldn't do anything, and I knew nothing about that kind of stuff. So so we shut down Immersive Studios. I sold the domain name for a reasonable, like £30 or something. It wasn't a lot, but because I don't believe in cyber squatting. So that was pretty well that. And then I thought, well, I've done all this work on it. I may as well use it to write a book while I'm waiting for a proper job. So I did, and the contents of that book was Designing Virtual Worlds, and that formed the basis of the degree course that I was then invited to do at the University of Essex. So that's how I got back into academia.
Okay, so that brings us full circle. Now, just to put a cap on that part of the story, what year does the book get published?
2003.
2003. When does Immersive shut down?
That would be, let me see, I think that was the same year, earlier that year. I'll have to look at my CV. Nope, I don't say to that. It would be about that same time, 2003 earlier, or maybe late 2002, something like that.
Okay. And the course, you first offer the course when, in 2004? Or?
Well, let's see. It was 21 years ago, so yes, 2004.
Okay, kids, so now that we've got mud out of the way, check back next time for a big episode where we talk the philosophy of games, the ethics of games, how games are game makers are educated, and the future of the medium itself. It's really, really a thinker episode. It's amazing. I know you're going to love it. So, see you here next time. I hope you've enjoyed another Video Game Newsroom Time Machine interview. You can leave us comments on Twitter, Instagram, and if you like what we're doing here, drop us a couple of bucks on Patreon. All the links are in the description below.